All right, well, congratulations on making it through the reading section of the TOEFL IBT exam. For this video, we are going to go through a summary of what you have just gone through in the entire reading section in the TOEFL Excellence Training System. So going back to the introduction, once again, the number of questions and tasks for the TOEFL reading section. First of all, in the standard version, you have 3 reading passages. You have 60 minutes. That means that you have 20 minutes per reading passage. However, this one is not as strict as it is with other parts of the TOEFL exam, because you can actually take more than 20 minutes or less per passage, because you can go back to different questions and change your answer, or maybe you can skip a question and go back to it later. But what I mean by 20 minutes per passage is obviously if you have 3 passages and you have 60 minutes, well, you divide that by 3. That's 20 minutes per passage. And we also know that in the new version of the TOEFL exam that started in August of 2019, there will be 10 questions and tasks per reading passage. Not 10 questions and 10 tasks, but between the questions and tasks, there will be 10 of them per passage. So this gives you a little bit more time per question than in the old version where it was 12 to 14 questions. And in the old version of the exam, what they did is that we have all the different question and task types. Well, what they did before is that some of the question types would show up on every reading passage. Some of them wouldn't show up at all. Others would show up more than once. And with the tasks, you would definitely get at least one of the tasks with each reading passage, but you wouldn't have each reading passage shown every time. Now, the changes with the TOEFL since August, it's still kind of new, so it's we don't really know the new pattern. Now, with different TOEFL textbooks and training programs, they might actually have a different number of question types, because these are not the official names for the different question types and task types. As you noticed from going through the course, I use different names than they use in the official videos, but as I explained on those pages, there's good reason for that. However, you also notice that between the questions and the tasks, there are 10. So this is just a theory, but there's a good chance that you'll get at least one of these with each reading passage. Like I said, this is just a theory. The new changes are still too new to know what the new pattern is like, but it used to be that you would get more than one factual information and detail question. You would get more than one pronoun reference question or vocabulary question. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work out with the new TOEFL, but you should expect to have at least one of each question and task type per passage. If you don't, well, then you'll probably get 1 or 2 of the different task types or question types repeated per reading passage, and that's kind of like how it used to. So there are 10 questions per reading passage. There are 3 reading passages. There is still an extended version of the exam, but in the past, it used to be between 4 and 5 reading passages in the extended. From what I've heard so far, the extended version is only 4. So really, there's not a change there, except, in the past, they said that you might get 5, but that almost never happened. So normal version, 3 passages. Extended version, 4 passages, 10 questions per reading passage. The reading passages are still the same length between the old version and the new version. They're about 600 to 700 words in length. And let's go through the different skills, strategies, and techniques. Okay, so the skills, strategies, and techniques needed. That's a tongue twister right there. Skills, strategies, and techniques needed. Say that 5 times fast. Okay, so the first one, the main 2 that you need here are skimming and scanning. Skimming is just quickly going over a text to gather key information. Scanning, that's exactly what we're doing right now. I'm skimming through these pages. We're just getting the most important information for the summary. So we're skimming over the text to get key information, to get a general idea. We have to scan through the text, through all the different question types to find specific information used by keywords and phrases or their synonyms and antonyms, and that's to answer the different questions. Most of the question types require scanning. One of the task types may require skimming. But with all of the different question types and task types, you'll be doing a little bit of both. But actually, you're going to be doing more scanning than skimming. So searching for keywords and their synonyms and antonyms is going to be the thing that you do the most out of the entire reading section. Okay, so skimming on the TOEFL. The only thing that you need to skim for on the TOEFL exam is for the main idea and important details. So this is done to get the general idea, or what we call the gist. The gist really is the general idea. Those two terms are interchangeable. This is done by reading titles and headings, any words in bold print, any italicized words, any underlined words, noticing names of people and places. Those are usually pretty easy to recognize in a text. Also noticing dates and numbers. Now, as I mentioned in this lesson, there aren't going to be a lot of italicized or underlined words. There might be some, usually not underlined. There might be a few italicized words. This is usually done when it's actually the name of a person or a place or something like a book that was written, things like that. So if you're reading about literature and you see an italicized word, that might be the title of some book that was written, something like that. As far as dates and numbers, those are obviously very easy to notice because they're numbers, but they're not a very important part of the reading sections. You don't really see a lot of numbers in the exam. Now, as I stated here, the most common advice is to read the first and last paragraph and read the first line of every paragraph. And as I state here, that's not necessarily going to be good advice for the TOEFL exam because as I did show you throughout the entire reading section of this course, sometimes the information in the first line of each paragraph is misleading. It's either not the main idea, and the second line is, if it's the first paragraph, or if they are body paragraphs, meaning not the first or last paragraph, then a lot of times the first line of the paragraph is actually just a transition from the previous paragraph. So the first line of this paragraph would be transitioning from the information in this paragraph. So this advice is not necessarily good advice for the TOEFL. It might be good advice when you're just studying in general, but for the TOEFL exam, it's not necessarily good advice. Once again, you just need to get the main idea and the supporting details. You may need to use skimming to get the organization of ideas in the text. That would really only be for the summary organization task. However, as you've already noticed by going through that, you don't necessarily have to put those ideas in order, and you can actually fulfill this task without having to skim through the text to get that organization of ideas. But this is something which might be able to help you with certain questions and tasks. Okay, so advice for skimming. I already basically gave you a lot of advice, but the main one I would say is that you should not read the full text before answering the questions. If you were a person who had not taken this course and you never studied for the TOEFL exam, then this was probably a good idea, or it would seem like a good idea. But since that's not you, because you are taking this course, then you already know from having gone through the section why this is not a good idea. And you also already know by going through this entire section that a lot of the questions are in references to just portions of the text where they actually tell you, and it's not necessary to read the entire text to answer the questions. So reading the entire text is almost certainly going to be a waste of your time. And time is certainly something that you need to focus on in the exam. You need to not waste any of it. All right, so that's the most important thing. Do not read the full text before answering the questions. So going on to skimming. Okay, so what you should actually do when you're skimming for the TOEFL, well, it depends a little bit on you, because one thing I do recognize is that everybody learns a little bit different and everybody does things a little bit different. So the method that I would use might not work for you as well as it works for me. And the method that another person uses might be terrible for me, but it might be excellent for them. So these are just suggestions. But as I state here, the first paragraph is usually like an introduction to the entire reading passage. It gives you the main idea, and it will also mention the supporting details. And then the body paragraphs the paragraphs that follow are going to be developing those supporting details a little bit further. Usually, the first paragraph is going to be talking about the first supporting detail. The third paragraph is going to be talking about the second supporting detail. And then if there's a fourth paragraph or final paragraph, that's going to be confirming the details, and it's going to summarize the entire reading passage. So that's basically the main structure of a lot of reading passages, but specifically the ones in the TOEFL. Because obviously, when you go out into the real world, a reading passage is not going to only be 600 to 700 words. This is the basic structure of how they are in the TOEFL exam. So as I mentioned, though, the technique that I give here, the TOEFL Excellence procedure, this is only the suggestions for if you do skim the entire reading passage. The only time that would really be necessary is if you need to do it for fulfilling one of the tasks. So you can always go back to this page, the skimming strategy, exactly what to do, and go over the suggestions that I make here. All right, so moving on. So the next part, scanning. As we mentioned before, scanning is looking for specific information within the text. This part I don't want to spend a lot of time on because it's not necessary. When you have the question types throughout the reading section, they are going to give you a small portion of the text that you find the word in. So really, you only have to scan a portion of text which is maybe this size to twice that size. It's a very short amount of text that you have to scan through, so it's really quick. And you usually have the question that asks you what information to look for, and then you use the specific words, the keywords, the synonyms and antonyms, and maybe the antonym, usually the synonyms and synonymous phrases, but sometimes it could be antonyms. And then scan for those in the passage. That's really it. So on to the specific reading skills that are tested. Now, this portion of the introduction is a little bit longer, and it's a lot of information, which honestly is not going to help you to answer each question and task type. And also, it's a good introduction for people who are, don't necessarily know about the TOEFL exam or what to expect. As far as the styles of the reading passage, once again, this is a little bit more academic information. It's not going to help you in answering any of the questions, but really it's just an explanation of the style of reading passages. Point of view, explanation, historical. These are talking about the types of reading passages. For the explanation, we have scientific, literary, and artistic. These are the subjects that they might be talking about. As I stated here, and as I state numerous times throughout the course, you do not have to study any of these subjects before doing the TOEFL exam. It would be a complete waste of time. More about the different types of reading passages, so we can move on to the next part. As far as the organizational structure of the reading passages, this is a little bit more academic information. It's not going to help you in answering any of the questions. It's just a little bit more information about the style of the reading passages. Classification, compare and contrast, cause and effect. This is just talking about what type of reading passage is it? Well, they're classifying some sort of information, or they're comparing this idea and contrasting it with that idea, or they're talking about some subject, which is the effect of some other cause, that type of thing. Bringing up some problem and then talking about its solution. So once again, it's just talking about the style of the reading passages. Okay, so now we're on to the specific questions and tasks. Really, this introduction here, it's just talking about the style of the questions. Multiple choice, sentence insertion, category, chart task, summary task. You've already been through the whole section, so you already know about all of those. So let's go on. And to the very first question type, the factual information and detail questions. Just to summarize once again, this one right here is basically having to do mostly with the main idea or the supporting details. So quite often, this will be in reference to the first paragraph. Not always, but it's usually in reference to the first paragraph, information in the first paragraph. And since this is often referring to the main idea or the supporting details, this is usually the first question that you get. According to the author, the price of tea in China is directly related to blah, blah, blah. And this is always going to be in reference to a portion of the text that they will actually show again. You saw that in the examples here. Let's show one example. So as you can see here, they give you a small portion of text. They ask you about this. You can use the keywords to find the synonyms if necessary, and then you use the answer choices to, if you're not sure, you can eliminate the ones that you know are wrong and then just go with the ones that are right. But as I said, factual information, this is the true information about things that were directly stated. Let's go on to the next one. All right, now the vocabulary questions. So in the previous version of the TOEFL, before they made the changes this year, I mentioned that oftentimes you would see the same question type more than once after each reading passage. This is one that they used to use more than once. So it's possible that you'll see the vocabulary question more than once after each reading passage. I don't know if they will still do it that way, but you should expect to see at least one vocabulary question after each reading passage. Once again, this is always going to be in reference to some portion of the text, and one of the ways that you can identify this question very easily is that the word is always going to be highlighted in the question stem, and it will also be highlighted in the portion of the text that they show you. So if the highlighted word or phrase, now here we have a phrase, took place. Well, this is not a pronoun, so we know that this is a vocabulary term. And as I mentioned in the course, a lot of times they will try to trick you with things like here they use the word placed and place. So if you don't know the word or phrase, they will try to trick you in ways to give you answer choices which may look similar. If you know the answer, most of the times you can just pick it and move on. Otherwise you might have to read the entire sentence to get the idea. Sometimes you can use the replacement method. If you still don't know for sure, you can take the word or phrase and try to replace it in the sentence to see if it fits. But in most cases, you probably will know the answer. At least you can know the answer just by doing the process of elimination. But the main thing here, the only question types that are going to be highlighted like this are either the vocabulary questions or the pronoun reference questions. So if the word or phrase that's being highlighted is not a pronoun, then it's a vocabulary term. And really they're handled in similar ways. But here you're looking for a definition or an explanation of what the phrase is. So let's move on to the next one. The negative information and detail questions. Now, as I stated in the course, the negative information and detail questions are really just the negative or opposite form of a factual information and detail question. The structure is exactly the same. The way that you handle it is almost the same. The only difference here is that you're going to see the word not or except in the question stem. So when you're looking for the answer for this one, you're going to look for the information which was not mentioned or it's not true. So if you have an answer choice which is actually factually true information, that can't be the answer for this one because this is about the one which is not true or which was not mentioned. So really, you're just taking the factual information and detail question and making it its opposite. And really, that's all we need to say about that one. So moving on to the implied or inferred meaning questions. So this one, you are going to be using information that was directly related in the text, but then you have to make an inference about what the person meant by some information. So with the implied or inferred meaning questions, this is one where you're looking for answers which are not directly stated within the text. So they will give you a portion of a text. This is kind of a long example. They're usually a little bit shorter than this, but this could be, you could get one that's this long. And they're going to ask you about some information which was implied, or they're going to ask you to make an inference about some information. Here, according to the paragraph, what can be implied about the condition of the temple before the 20th century? So the answer, the correct answer choice, is not going to be something which was directly stated. So if you have some information down here in one of the answer choices which was directly stated in the paragraph, that can't be the answer choice, even if the information itself is true information, then it's not implied information. So the correct answer choice for implied or inferred meaning questions is something which is not directly stated. You have to actually think about what was meant by something that was stated or what was meant by the information that was given. All right, moving on. Okay, so the purpose questions. This is another one where you actually have to think a little bit about the answer rather than just choosing some information which is given for you. Because here, this is the one where you have to think about not any information specifically that was given, but why the information was given. And this is the one where we have to focus on the verb phrases that are in the answer choices. Why did the author mention to illustrate, to show, to imply? Okay, now the most important part here is the verb phrase. The factual information is secondary. So you have to focus on the verb phrases here. Now, does this information illustrate something? If yes, well, then put it in the maybe section. Because here you can see we have illustrate, show, and show. So you have to look at the information and does it actually show something? Does this information show something? If not, eliminate it. Does this information imply something? If it doesn't imply, but it actually specifically states this, then that can't be the correct answer. So you're not looking exactly at if the information is factually true or not. You're looking at whether or not the information does what the verb phrase is showing. And that's really the trick behind this purpose question. So let's move on to the pronoun reference question. Now, this one, as I mentioned before, is very similar to the vocabulary question because you will see the pronoun, which is in reference, highlighted in the question stem, and you'll also see it highlighted in the portion of the text that they give you. I would normally say that this is the easiest question type, but it's possible that there is someone out there doing this course where pronouns might be a little bit tricky for them, especially when we have an example of the pronoun it. A lot of times we use that pronoun where it's not directly in reference, which is something that's stated. It's in reference to something which is implied, and that usually happens when it's at the beginning of the sentence. But usually a pronoun is in reference to a person or a thing. So as I mentioned before, the pronoun question is going to be very easy to identify because it's the one where the pronoun, which is actually in reference, is going to be highlighted in the question stem, and it's also going to be highlighted in the reading passage. All right, so those ones shouldn't be too difficult for you, though, because if you are at the level of taking the TOEFL exam, then you should already know pronouns pretty well. So let's go on to the next question type. Okay, so with the paraphrase questions, this is the one where you have the reading passage, and you'll notice here the entire sentence is highlighted. Rather than just a single word. So when you see the whole sentence highlighted, then you know it's the paraphrase question. This is one where it might take you a little bit longer because not only do you have to read the entire sentence carefully to know exactly what it's saying, but then you should carefully read each sentence down below to make sure that the points mean the same thing in each sentence. Now, if you're reading one of the answer choices down below, and before you even finish the sentence, you know it's wrong because one of the answer choices has either made some information incorrect or opposite of what it is, don't bother finishing to read the sentence. Just move on to the next one. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll flip the clauses. So you see here, this one has a comma here, and there's a comma in this clause here. So there are two different clauses. So a lot of times what they'll do, here we have the 12th century is mentioned in the second clause, and here the 12th century is mentioned in the first clause. So a lot of times the correct answer will just be something where they just flipped the clauses. That's one of the easiest ways to make the change, but they might make it a little bit more complicated. Because you see here, there are three different answer choices down below where the 12th century is in a different clause. So you can't just rely on that. So you actually have to read through each one and make sure that the information is correct in each point. So that's why this one might take a little bit longer. Not because it's more difficult, but because you actually have to take in a little bit more information. Okay, so moving on to the first of the task types. So, task type 1, the text insertion. This is the one where you have the missing sentence in the reading passage, and you have the 4 little black boxes that show where the missing sentence could be placed into the paragraph. A lot of times they have a box at the beginning and a box at the end. One of the quickest ways to determine this is if you have a sentence where it starts with a pronoun, it's almost definitely not going to be in the first part. Because you're usually not going to start a paragraph with a pronoun. So with this one, you're given an introductory sentence, which is supposed to represent a portion of a full summary statement. And then you have to finish the summary by choosing correct answer choices from the list. And some of these answer choices might be a summary statement, others might just be into detail, others might be incorrect information. So one of the things is, if you come across one of the answer choices and it's not true, it's not information which was stated, or it's information which is factually not true, that's not one of the answers, obviously. If you come across an answer choice which is true information, but it's a minor detail and it's not in reference to the entire reading passage, then it's not a summary statement. If you come across an answer choice which does have detail, but it's detail which is important to the entire reading passage, then that's probably one of your summary statements. If you go through and you have, maybe you have two of the answer choices and you've eliminated a couple others, if you have two answer choices which are left, and they both seem like they could be correct answers, first of all, pick the one that seems like it would be more of a summary rather than a detail. If you're still confused and you're not sure, just pick one of them. Just don't leave any of the answer choices blank just because you're not sure. So do your best about picking the statements which are a summary of the entire reading passage. If you have any left, as with any of the questions and tasks, if you're not sure and you have an answer choice left, just pick one. Don't leave it blank. And then moving on to the last of the task types, the chart completion task. Okay, so with the chart completion task, this is a little bit more in reference to factual information and details that they mention in the text. And you might be able to finish this task just because of the information that you have gotten from doing all the other question types. You might not even have to refer to the entire reading passage because some of the answer choices are going to be obvious. So you just look at whatever categories that they have. There'll either be 2 or 3 different categories to choose from, and there will always be more answer choices than there are correct answers. So here you have 5 correct answers and you have 7 answer choices. Just go through and then, first of all, eliminate any that are obviously wrong. Choose the ones which are obviously right. Like some of these are going to be obvious about general history. Some are going to be obvious about construction in this example. And then whichever ones are left, and you have any that are empty, just eliminate the ones that are not true, and whichever ones are left. If you're not sure, just guess. But sometimes you might get an answer choice where it seems like it's in reference to both. So that's one of the only times that you might actually have to go back to the reading passage to determine. But if you don't have enough time to go back and do that, and you're running out of time or something like that, just pick whichever one you think is the best to finish the chart. But as I stated, some of the answer choices are going to be obvious for which category they go in. Some of the answer choices are going to be obviously wrong. For the ones that are left over, just put them in the correct category. And that's it for all of the different question and task types. Let's go to the overall reading section experience. As I mentioned on this page, and you probably just went through this page recently because that was right before this one, this basically just goes through what the whole experience is going to be like. Obviously, you're going to sit down into a room with a whole bunch of other people doing the test at the exact same time. Everybody's timer is going to be the same, so you're all going to be doing the same things at the same time. Just pay attention to the timer. Remember, you have about 20 minutes per reading passage, but you can go back to different questions. So if you are not sure about one, you can write that down on your piece of paper and go back to it later and check on it if you do have time left over. Because with this one, you might finish the entire reading section. You might finish all of the questions and tasks and still have time left over. Well, you can't just move on to the next section, and make sure to stay calm. That's the most important thing. You can't move on to the next section once you're done. So if you have time left afterwards, go back to those questions and tasks that you might have skipped over or that you weren't sure of, and use that time to go over those questions. But really just try to focus, because you're going to be in a room full of other people and there might even be noises outside. And this is true with the entire section, but with the reading section, Luckily you won't have other people speaking at the same time, so you won't have that noise distraction. But that's pretty much it. You sit down, you put on your headphones, you get an introduction to the exam, and then you get an introduction to the reading section. The reading section starts, you see the first reading passage, and then you have to click a button at the beginning of the page. So that will actually start it for you. Your timer will already start once that reading section comes on your page. So make sure you don't waste any time. Once you see the first reading section, scroll down to the bottom of the page, press that button, you'll see the first question, and then you go. So just remember to stay calm, pay attention to the timer. Remember that you can take notes on the whole exam, but you shouldn't need to take notes about anything on the reading section. There's nothing that in the reading section that would require you to take notes, except for if you skip a question and you want to go back to it later. Make sure you write down which question that was so you don't have to spend time looking for it. That's about the only thing that you would really need to take notes on. If you're going through this course, well, you are going through this course, so by the time you finish going through this course, you're going to know what all the directions are. So when you hear the directions in the headphones, just take that time to close your eyes and, take a deep breath and relax, because you already know what the directions are. They're not going to help you. And they're not going to give you any new information that you don't already know. The main things that are going to be unique to each exam are the questions. As far as the directions, they're the same every time. So really, that's it. That's all we need to talk about the reading section. And now you can go through and do the reading section practice. Congratulations on getting through this first section. And I will speak with you again, well, not only in the first question of the listening section, but we'll do another one of these summaries at the end of the listening section. So we'll see you again soon. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next lesson.